The tragedy of the Antarctic explorer who's died within touching distance of history. Former Army officer Henry Worsley left one last poignant message on his audio diary.
My journey is at an end. I have run out of time, physical endurance, and a simple, sheer inability to slide one ski in front of the other.
Also tonight, the question for the Hillsborough jury: was it manslaughter?
Cecil Parkinson, one of Margaret Thatcher's most trusted political allies, has died.
And banned for eye gouging, biting and headbutting, the rugby bad boy who's now England's captain.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
Good evening. Henry Worsley was just 30 miles short of making history in one of the most dangerous and inhospitable places on Earth. The adventurer was trying to become the first person to cross the Antarctic entirely alone, but he died from dehydration and exhaustion.
The former army officer was hoping to recreate and complete the unfinished journey of his hero, Sir Ernest Shackleton, 100 years ago. Henry's friend, Prince William, was among those paying tribute today. He said the adventurer had showed great courage and determination. Neil Connery reports.
Henry Worsley was determined to become the first person to cross the Antarctic unaided. This was the former army officer training for an expedition in 2009, always aware of the dangers.
Henry?
Yeah?
How are you? You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right. You crack on.
On Friday, just 30 miles from finishing this historic journey, he was airlifted suffering from exhaustion and severe dehydration. The married father of two died yesterday in hospital in Chile. In his last audio message before he was rescued, his courage and determination shone through his exhausted voice.
My journey is at an end. I have run out of time, physical endurance, and a simple, sheer inability to slide one ski in front of the other to cover the distance required to reach my goal. My summit was just out of reach, but I spent 70 days all alone in a place I love. I'll lick my wounds, they will heal over time, and I will come to terms with disappointment.
Henry really was an extraordinary human being. He displayed immense courage, determination, and a huge degree of selflessness in order to put himself through this kind of journey over 71 days and across 900 miles on the severest, one of the most severe environments on the planet.
Henry Worsley was attempting to complete Sir Ernest Shackleton's unfinished journey to the South Pole. As a child, he was fascinated with polar exploration. A distant cousin of Worsley's was captain of the Endurance on Shackleton's mission.
This is a very, very hard, almost to take in. This is a very sad day. Henry died very bravely, doing a very brave thing. Here we very much miss.
Henry Worsley had so far raised £100,000 for the Endeavour Fund to help injured service personnel. The Duke of Cambridge, who was patron of the expedition, said, "We have lost a friend, but he will remain a source of inspiration to us all." Neil Connery, ITV News.
The jury at the Hillsborough inquests has been asked to decide whether the 96 victims of the disaster were unlawfully killed. The coroner says they must consider whether the actions of David Duckenfield, the senior police officer on duty, were so negligent they amounted to manslaughter. The coroner has begun summing up after nearly 2 years of evidence. From the hearing in Warrington, Damon Green reports.
For almost 2 years, the families of Hillsborough victims have attended this court, making their long journey in search of the truth. Now the beginning of the final stage of that journey.
I'm quietly satisfied where we are at this moment in time. It's been a long, long battle. There's been some very traumatic events along the way. Anger within me, emotion with all the families. we're pleased to have got to this stage because we know we're nearing the end.
I'm pleased that we finally reached the summing up stage because it's been a long 2 years, obviously, of evidence and everything else that's been told. So I'm just pleased we're now on the final stage. You know, it's the beginning of the end, if you like, and there's some kind of relief in that.
Today, the coroner, Lord Justice Goldring, began the task of summing up the events of that day and what led to them. The build-up of supporters at the Leppings Lane turnstiles, the opening of the gate that allowed them to surge into already overcrowded pens, and the response of emergency services to an unfolding disaster. The jury will consider 14 questions, 14 possible errors or omissions leading to the crush on the terrace. They'll examine the role of the emergency services, including South Yorkshire Police and South Yorkshire Ambulance Service, the role played by Sheffield Wednesday's safety planning, the designers of the stadium, and even the behaviour of the fans. They'll be asked to decide whether the 96 Hillsborough victims were unlawfully killed and whether the negligence of senior police officers caused their deaths. To bring that verdict, jurors will have to be satisfied that the man seen here on the left, former Chief Superintendent David Duckenfield, who ordered the opening of that gate, was responsible for manslaughter by gross negligence. It's been a very emotional day for the Hillsborough families, and the coroner's had something to say to the jury about emotion. He said, "You would not be human if you did not feel a very powerful sympathy for these people who've lost loved ones, but you must set that emotion aside when reaching your verdicts. At the same time," he says, "you must not shrink from making critical findings if those findings are justified."
All right, Damon, thank you very much.
So-called Islamic State is planning more Paris-style attacks in Europe, and the continent is facing its most serious terrorist threat in a decade. That was the warning today from the head of Europol as the law enforcement agency opened a new counter-terrorism centre in The Hague. Well, our security editor, Rohit Kachru, is here. So, Rohit, why this warning and why now?
Because Europol say that IS is active here in Europe. Had we been discussing the perceived threat a year ago in Europe, we might have been talking about self-radicalised jihadists, lone wolf attackers. Paris changed all of that, and that reassessment was underlined last night when we saw this new video from IS, which appeared to show some of the Paris attackers several months before the slaughter training in Syria. It all suggested direction and coordination, and it ended with a specific threat against the UK. And part of that led to the Europol boss, a British officer today, warning that IS is now going to put more focus on attacking Europe.
The so-called Islamic State has a willingness and a capability to carry out further attacks in Europe. And of course, all of the national authorities across Europe are working to prevent that from happening. We know that there is a capability.
The lesson for security agencies right across Europe after Paris was to share information sooner and to share it better. There was not enough of that happening between Belgium and France in the months leading up to the Paris attack. There's evidence that's not always happening. Many national governments see national security as a national issue, but this new centre from Europol is aimed at trying to break down some of those boundaries.
OK, Rohit, thank you.
The Prime Minister has been leading tributes to Lord Parkinson, the former government minister and Conservative Party chairman, who's died at the age of 84. Mr Cameron said he was one of the towering figures of the 1980s.
Cecil Parkinson served in many senior posts under Margaret Thatcher and remained famously loyal to her. But as our political correspondent Romilly Weeks reports, his career was brought down by an affair with his secretary.
Charismatic, well-connected and powerful, Cecil Parkinson was a huge figure in Margaret Thatcher's government. As party chairman, he masterminded the thumping victory that returned her to power in 1983. Today, the party's current leader remembered him as the first big political figure who showed him the ropes.
He was part of a great political generation that did really extraordinary things for our country. He'll be hugely missed by many on all sides of the political divide, and my thoughts are with Cecil's wife, Anne, and their family at this very sad time.
Like Mrs Thatcher, Cecil Parkinson was self-made, the son of a railwayman. At the height of his powers, Mrs Thatcher even saw him as her potential successor. until he was brought down by the scandal of an affair with his secretary and the birth of a daughter he tried to keep secret. It was one of the biggest political scandals of the era. Michael Portillo was his aide at the time.
He felt that he couldn't go on with the job. He would not be able to concentrate on his responsibilities with so much media attention. And with the words, "that is that," he quit. And I then drove Cecil and Anne from Blackpool down to their home in Hertfordshire and into relative political obscurity.
His shot at the highest office was over, but he did remain loyal to Mrs Thatcher to the end. Lord Lawson, who served in the same cabinet with him and Norman Tebbit, said his value to her was incalculable.
I think it was very important to Margaret Thatcher because until she appointed Norman and Cecil and me, she didn't really have a Thatcherite majority in cabinet. So that made a huge difference. And Cecil was, throughout that time, a good friend and a great colleague.
His family announced his death of cancer at the age of 84, saying his wife, children and grandchildren will miss him terribly.
The Conservative politician Lord Parkinson, whose death was announced today.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, why a private firm has been forced to stop making asylum seekers in Cardiff wear coloured wristbands.
And he's had more than his fair share of trouble, but apparently it's all in the past for England's new rugby captain. I'm sure it is. Those stories and more right after the break. Welcome back. It's a review of Labour's recent failings that has clear warnings for its current leader. A report obtained by ITV News into the party's election defeat implies Jeremy Corbyn is taking it in the wrong direction. It concludes that to return to power, Labour must return to the centre ground. And as our political editor Robert Peston explains, that contrasts starkly with the party's swing to the left under Mr Corbyn.
It was the election neither the pollsters or Labour thought Ed Miliband would lose. But lose Labour did, and how. Humiliated in Scotland by Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish National Party, soundly beaten by the Tories in the country as a whole. What went wrong? Well, a secret report for Labour, obtained by ITV News, says that Labour negatives are deep and powerful among voters who deserted the party. That these former supporters see Labour as in denial about what they see as its appalling track record on the economy. Ed Miliband was viewed as a weak and bumbling leader. So the report calls on Labour to atone for its past and show that it takes Scotland seriously. The report was based on conversations with skilled people, junior managers like school teachers, people in catering and drivers. They kept Labour in power under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. They now fear Labour doesn't represent them properly.
We are the party of working people, but if you say that, but people don't believe that, then you've got a problem, and it's a problem that you've got to reckon with.
These pretty trenchant criticisms that these voters made of Labour didn't make it into Labour's official report into what went wrong. How worried are you about that?
We have got to listen to what the public's been saying to us. You know, this report confirms what many of us heard when we were campaigning in marginal seats. People didn't trust us on the economy or with their taxes, and they didn't think that we would take tough decisions and provide strong leadership.
Duty sacks at £20 only.
Croydon, one of the places researched for Labour by the firm Britain Thinks to find out what went wrong. What do they reckon of the new leader?
He just seems very arrogant.
I think he should be given a chance.
But he sounds genuine, that he's going to do it to help the people.
Don't even know him.
And do you think Jeremy Corbyn gets it?
Yeah, any person who went around the country as we did after the election, speaking to people, knows that Labour's got a huge job of work to do. We have to really speak to a different kind of politics.
Is Labour just for the down and outs or for the middle classes too?
The dilemma for Labour's leader, summed up by one resonant phrase in the report. Can he persuade the ambitious middle classes that he's on their side? Robert Peston, ITV News.
Education Secretary Nicky Morgan has said she is alarmed at the circumstances surrounding the death of Poppy Worthington from Cumbria. The Crown Prosecution Service is reviewing its decision not to pursue criminal charges. A High Court judge has said 13-month-old Poppy was sexually assaulted by her father.
An inquest is to be held into the death of the Leeds teacher Anne Maguire. She was stabbed in her classroom by a pupil who later pleaded guilty to murder.
Work has begun to cover up a Banksy mural outside the French embassy in London. The artwork's based on the poster from Les Miserables and criticises the police for using tear gas in the Calais refugee camp.
And a fifth dead whale has been washed up on the east coast of England. It's thought to be from the same pod as those found at the weekend near Skegness.
A Home Office contractor which made asylum seekers wear red wristbands in order to get food says it will now stop the practice. Some of the asylum seekers staying in the temporary accommodation in Cardiff said it stigmatised them and made them targets for abuse. From there, our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn reports.
The tag of an asylum seeker, the label that says you're an outsider. The wristband gives its wearer the right to be fed, but it also causes them grief and abuse on the streets of Cardiff. These men were given no choice by those who have control over their board and lodging, and it's left them exposed.
If I have no this, I can't get the food. I can't go, I can't eat here. For that I have to wear this.
A strict policy in operation, so much so that one former resident told me food would be denied if wristbands were missing.
So not only are you an asylum seeker, not only are you somebody who's swum to the Atlantic, or you've come into the country under the belly of a train, you have to carry this thing again. It's like a permanent marker. Are you an asylum seeker? And then where's your label?
With asylum seekers being targeted in Middlesbrough because their front doors were painted red, and now similar issues with identification here in Cardiff, it's claimed this group is under threat.
It's clearly been done without any thought and without any malice. It's a logistical decision, but it's had a terrible effect on those people. And the one crumb of comfort we can take from this situation is that the Home Office stepped in really quickly and that this practice is going to be changed.
Wristbands are not the only issue Home Office contractors, Clear Springs, Ready Homes may have to explain. I filmed inside their Cardiff hostel today and found it mouldy and run down. Residents afraid to speak in case it impacted on their lives. Clear Springs, who run this hostel, are under fire. They have changed their wristband policy. They say they're grateful for feedback and are reviewing procedures, but this exposure will leave many wondering if they are up to the job. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Cardiff.
Tennis, a British woman has made it through to the quarter-finals of a Grand Slam tournament for the first time in 32 years. Joanna Konta beat Russia's Ekaterina Makarova in 3 sets this morning in the Australian Open. She'll now play the Chinese qualifier Zhang Shuai.
And Andy Murray is also through after beating Bernard Tomic from Australia. It's the first time a British man and woman have reached the last 8 in the same Grand Slam since 1977.
Now, he's no stranger to the sin bin or suspension, but it hasn't done Dylan Hartley much harm. The rugby union bad boy has just been unveiled as the new England captain.
Yes, the hooker has been banned for a total of 54 weeks during his career for eye gouging, biting, headbutting, elbowing and swearing at a referee. But today he insists he's a changed man, as our sports editor Steve Scott reports.
There's no escaping the fact England's new captain is a serial offender. Elbowing, eye gouging, punching and headbutting, even calling the referee a cheat. It's a rap sheet that has cost him a full year in bans, 2 World Cups and a Lions tour. On Best Behaviour today, Hartley wasn't hiding from his past, but told me he can now be trusted.
Unfortunately, I've got to live with that and continue playing with that. And it's a reputation and perception. It's something that I, as a player, have earned in a way, and I've got to deal with it. Every game I go into, I'm aware of it. But for me, that's the past. I'm just looking forward.
As a first big call for Eddie Jones, it is some statement. England's rugby captain is traditionally seen as so much more than just a leader on the pitch.
I think players mature. Players go through phases in their career. I think Dylan's been through that phase. He's obviously made some mistakes, but I think he's learned from it. And I think, you know, he's got the necessary discipline, the necessary maturity to go forward as a good England captain.
But one former captain thinks it's a gamble that could come back to haunt Jones.
You need your captain on the pitch. You need him to be there making the decisions. With Dylan Hartley, he has previous for missing a large number of games. I would love to think that the appointment of Dylan as captain will bring a new side out of him.
If it doesn't, there will be plenty queuing up to say to Eddie Jones, "I told you so." Steve Scott, ITV News.
And finally tonight, for sporting endeavours of an altogether different kind, 4 British women have become the first all-female crew to row across the Pacific. The team arrived in Australia overnight, 9 months after setting off from San Francisco.
Yes, they saw off giant waves and circling sharks to raise money for charities Walking with the Wounded and Breast Cancer Care. Well done, them.
Well done, then. That's it for now. Tom's here with news at 10.
But from everyone on the Evening News, have a very good night.
Bye-bye.